Thanks everybody for joining. It's great to be here. And yeah, we're going to just cover, it's quite short, so we'll cover kind of a whistle stop around some key areas of learnings that we found, because we do a lot of international research through constantly. So, but we'll tell you about a little bit more about that in a minute. Next slide, Anne. Anne's driving the slides today. So yeah, just about us, as Sina said, we're an international, essentially design research agency. Our heritage is very much in the kind of really in the human-computer interaction, and then into user experience. And then really as things have emerged, starts to merge across into everything, even towards service design. But we're at the core, we're very much a qualitative, research agency, user research, if you like. And we help our clients, improve their experiences in all the different ways that I'm sure you're all aware, and across all the different methods, come from discovery all the way through to more evaluative and even sometimes optimization style work. And one of the key things just to point out in terms of us is we're quite small at the core, but we have this very large network that we're constantly growing of senior experienced practitioners, researchers over many years. And that's really how we're able to deliver international work, really embedded locally, because we're not really partnering with other agencies or other entities. We actually have individuals who we've worked with and kind of gone through a process to know that they're really capable. And yeah, and we're very transparent with clients about that. And it's a really nice model. So we'll go from there. So I'm, as Sina said, I'm the consultancy director. I've been in this space for quite a long time, not probably too long, sort of 20 plus years. Agency side, really done a lot of client side work, but I've always been agency side. And yeah, growing teams and in big and small agencies alike. So hand it over to Anne.
Hello, so my name is Anne Wilbers, and I'm Senior UX Research Consultant at the agency. And I've been with the agency for about 18 months now, and I live in the UK, but I'm originally from Germany. And before that, I also worked in in-house research teams in the UK and in Germany. So I kind of have the perspective from different sides. And yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about learnings from international research. And you might think, well, it's globalization, so aren't things pretty much the same everywhere now? So why would I bother testing designs or prototypes in different countries? Because everybody's using Facebook, everybody's using Instagram. So why would I test my concept or my design in different countries? And there are a lot of obvious reasons you might think of. And I think the first obvious reason is always discovery research, right? If you want to launch your product or your service in a different country and you just want to figure out, does this product even fit in the country? Does it even make sense to launch a service there? Are there any country specific pain points, for example, in ordering online, or maybe in traveling, or in healthcare and finance, etc. And people just might have very different mental models, and for example, how things work, right? I'll come back to this a bit later, but I think one of the key projects we ran in the past month was a big project with 5 different countries for a luxurious online retailer. And it was all about loyalty. And it was we found a lot of similarities, right? Why people are loyal to certain brands across the 5 different countries, which were Germany, Japan, Russia, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. And there were a lot of similarities, but there were also a lot of differences, right? Let alone the accessibility of luxurious products. Some people are saying, well, it's really, really difficult to buy certain things online, or it might be really even harder in the specific country. So there were definitely a lot of differences why this discovery research made a lot of sense. And yeah, there might be other obvious reasons. You might be aware of, there are other rules or regulations in the other country, or there might be other delivery or payment systems. For example, in one country, people might use a lot of Klarna, or maybe use a lot of PayPal, or maybe even something that you've never heard of. And there might also be different delivery systems. And I put this picture of the Packstation in there because I think this is a very like unique thing that you have in Germany, right? So in the UK, people are like, what? Like they do know DHL, and there are similar things like lockers, but it's not as common as it is in Germany. So it might be a very obvious reason why you want to test in different countries. Another very obvious reason to test in different countries, for example, is different healthcare systems, right? And in Germany, we have the statutory and private insurance system, but in the UK, there's, for example, the I think quite well-known NHS. So healthcare is basically free, and people, of course, then have completely different models about how to access healthcare and how everything works, right? So, for example, in the UK, people are much more willing to pay for private healthcare just because they know the NHS is free, and there are long waiting times, so they are more willing to pay if they need something very urgently. Whereas in Germany, where people know they are actually already paying for their insurance, they are not really willing to pay for any additional service because they say, well, my insurance is already paying, why do they not cover this, for example? And we also run one project, for example, for a pharmacy software provider, and it was really interesting because it was in the UK, but we even came across differences in the different nations. So, for example, in England, it's just very common that you have e-prescriptions. And then, of course, there's a whole different idea around when I go to the doctor, how does the prescription go from the doctor to the pharmacy? So it's sent digitally. Whereas in Scotland, people are using paper prescriptions. So this is more like the German model, right? You go to the doctor, they hand you over the paper prescription, then you take this one to the pharmacy. And of course, this is like a whole different setup behind everything, and definitely worth investigating. Then, another obvious reason might be everything around vehicles. We just recently ran a project for a very well-known online e-commerce platform, and it was all about vehicles and how to buy certain accessories for that and tires, etc. And of course, the team who was designing was very aware that there are different identification numbers, right? In the UK, you just use like the registration number, which is basically the license plate. Whereas in Germany, you've got all those Schlüsselnummern, like the THS and HIS numbers, and they are very different. And they, of course, designed everything accordingly, but we still figured out that there are quite some nuances between the perception of both things, because in the UK, participants said, well, that's very easy, reg number, all good, like I'm used to that. And when it came about the specific tires, they were like, well, just all season tires, like why would I need different seasons? Whereas participants in Germany said like, yeah, but like, why don't you let me choose between winter and summer tires? Nobody really had thought of that before, because it was like, well, it's just tires, you know? And participants in Germany were really like, well, it's so important, I need my winter tires. And there were even like very small nuances between the UK and the US, because it said on one of the designs, it said it fits your vehicle. And in the US, that would mean, yeah, it fits the vehicle. So this is the right tire for your car. Whereas people in the UK understood it more like a fitting service. So someone who's installing the tire. So also small nuances, even though it's the same language. Then there are a lot of less obvious reasons. So, and I think the obvious ones are good or like easy to kind of argue when you want to ask for more money or for more budget, more time. And the less obvious reasons are probably something where people might say, well, why would you do that, right? So it's going to work in every country, so why would you even bother? And the designs might be based on unconscious stereotypes. You might not even be aware of that, right? We had a very nice example again from this 5-country study, where it was all about like beauty and loyalty and luxurious items. And the assumption was really that, well, Saudi Arabia is not really interested in Western culture. We assume it's a very religious country, and we assume that people are probably not very interested in fashion and not interested in beauty. And actually, it was the complete opposite. It was really interesting because participants actually said, well, we kind of think that Saudi Arabia is kind of in the forefront of luxurious online or luxurious shopping in general, because we've got all the brands here, we've got huge malls, it's super important, everybody goes shopping, and we think we have actually the best service. So if that wouldn't have been tested before, like the design would have just been made on just very, very stereotypical things, right? Yeah, then other less obvious reasons, maybe users have concerns or any barriers to use a certain service. For example, again, the same project I was talking about was in Japan. We actually found that the participants were very, very reluctant to order anything online that's from abroad, just because they were so afraid really of accidentally ordering a counterfeit, so like a fake product. And it had all to do a lot with kind of the idea of really living life truthfully, and really hating to be cheated. And so they were very reluctant. They're like, well, if I don't know the brand and the brand is abroad, I actually don't want to order it because I'm just so afraid that they cheat on me, right? Then another less obvious reason, I think this is a very, very nice example, something I experienced in a previous role. We wanted to test an app in test flight. The engineers were all UK based, tested it 100 times beforehand, no bugs, everything was great. And I think I spoke to like the first or second German participant, and we figured, amazing, they have a very German name with an umlaut in it, and umlaut names were just not working in the registration form. So you might discover bugs that you wouldn't have discovered any other way. And yeah, translation. So it's of course a lot about translation when you test in several countries. And we definitely made the experience that professional human translation is still the best way. We have, I think, a lot of examples of where it just didn't work properly. And of course, like Google Translation, for example, or any other auto translation, it's just getting better and better, but it's still not the same. And we have a lot of examples from, for example, like clients who insisted on just using Google Translate because of course, like there's time pressure, you have to work as fast as possible and you just want to have the first results, and just why bother like putting extra money and time into translations. And it just confuses the participants a lot during the research sessions when it's not translated in a very, very good way. Yeah, what to watch out for. So of course you think, yeah, sure, prototypes. Of course, I'll translate that, of course. And it's, as I said, it's just very, very important, because what we found, what happens is when the translation is inaccurate, participants just comment a lot on the copy, and they are just not talking about the things you actually want them to talk about, or they might just be completely confused in a user flow that would actually work just if the copy was correct, right? If the translations would work much better. It will just definitely skew your results, and it just, yeah, things can just go sideways. Also, yeah, I made this one experience also where we thought, okay, we are really in a hurry, we're testing tomorrow, so we just do the translations ourselves. Like, we're both German native speakers, like what could possibly go wrong? Yeah, what I basically learned in this research session was that my German is not very good. What we didn't learn was the actual research question during this iteration, which was, does the registration flow work? I mean, we got a lot of help in terms of typos and in terms of grammar, it was also helpful, but of course that wasn't the research objective of this iteration. And yeah, then also the discussion guide is of course very important. And you might think, well, I'm just writing this myself, whatever, why would I bother? But if you are testing in several countries at the same time, of course, you want to have the same discussion guide and you want to talk about the same things. And what we usually do is we have one discussion guide in English and then just send it to professional translation services. I still go through the German discussion guide then, because there are just so many words that are translated literally, and then it doesn't make sense. You know, for example, in German, like in the introduction, I would never say, ich bin ein Forscher. Of course, I say, ich bin user researcher. It doesn't make sense. Or the word beauty. We did a project around beauty, and if you translate it to Schönheit, it also doesn't make sense. If you go and say like, oh, what are Schönheitsprodukte for you? It's weird, right? We also came across, again, the loyalty example, that there might be things that you just can't translate. And it might be something like a concept or a term or a definition. And when we did this loyalty research, we again had one English standard discussion guide, and then send it to translators, and then send it to the different researchers in the different countries. And the first one who came back was the Japanese researcher and said, well, you talk about loyalty, but there's not really a translation for loyalty in Japanese. It just doesn't work. We just have to kind of like work around it. And then I looked at the German one and also thought, well, loyalty, okay, you can sort of translate it, but loyalty program, again, would you translate a bit differently compared what it actually was in the discussion guide? And then also the Brazilian researcher came back to us and said, well, again, the word loyalty program doesn't work in Portuguese. People just won't understand it. So it's really important that even when you're writing this discussion guides yourself, that you align on the terms that you're using and align on the definitions. And yeah, then I'm handing over to John, because he's definitely the specialist for everything that's around research ops.
Sure, thanks very much, Anne. Great, yeah, I'm going to kind of transition just to close on a few areas in research ops, research operations issues, because that's very much my role now in terms of not just directing, but supporting all of our researchers and teams at various times. So we learn quite a lot around things are constantly changing, and pretty much for the better, which is great. Like solutions are getting more sophisticated, which is fantastic. But yes, so continue on with translation, going not just from written translation, but to live translation, especially for us as an agency, often in particular, where we'll have big client teams, design teams, and product teams, stakeholders, where they'll be needing and wanting to kind of get those insights, and often even live, being very engaged. So having live translation during the sessions, and there are, while haven't seen any evidence that we're quite there with any kind of robot kind of solution, definitely human, real interpreters, real translators are definitely still the best way, and they're quite amazing. Yeah, when you have them, their skills quite incredible. But yeah, we need to line them up in almost everything Anne was just talking about with the discussion guide, including they do need to have sight at least as a day, or they'd love to have it earlier, but having them kind of come cold and almost have no idea, they become an extended part of the team, even if they're sort of parachuted in the last very shortly to kind of do their task. So that's a key thing that's quite important with them, is just getting them aligned and making sure that they have the right context and orientation for what they're going to be seeing and hearing in advance, and then it plays so much better. Just to quickly touch on, of course, in a face-to-face world, we've definitely moved towards almost a remote world in the last few years, in particular. But for many years, face-to-face research, in particular, often in venues, research venues, as an example. Yeah, it's just interesting, the differences as a reflection. Where we would have translator, they would often be in the observation room because the majority needed translation, for example, say to English, but you get all kinds of interesting hardware challenges, which we luckily don't really have anymore, such as they have to have a certain headset so that they're kind of hearing the other, the main interview room, but they're speaking out into the room in English. Meanwhile, anybody who really needs to still listen to it in the native language has headsets on as they're listening into the other room. Meanwhile, capturing the English translation recording, that's then going to be joined up with the kind of recording of the session. So there's quite a few literal nuts and bolts that, that we would face for many years and had figured it all out. But yeah, it's a lot of hard work. Whereas now we're very much in almost kind of like remote world, primarily, which, lose some things, but you definitely, gain opportunities in particular about reach and location for participants and kind of reach for their localities as well, even within country. But of course, in terms of translation, of course, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but we've kind of moved it to Zoom, ends up being a really kind of core ubiquitous sort of platform. And of course, it has very, very good capabilities for interpretation feature and for having live translators, even in multiple languages. So suddenly it almost all goes away. All these very challenging kind of hardware almost solutions, almost could become embedded into the software. And in terms of even just the way we're used to using things like Zoom, like we are right now. So it's it's a much better world in that regard, which is fantastic. But there's still definitely lots of little things within that you kind of learn around making sure you get them aligned and everything's working right, etc. There can be little tricky things in Zoom even still. Recordings, one other option there, which is just a little fiddly but nice, is on Zoom. You can just give rights for somebody to record locally in addition to the main recording in the cloud. And if they're listening to the translated audio, then it'll capture that one. And you kind of immediately then have the translated recording as well as the original kind of native recording right after the session's done, which is very just reduces lots of other aspects to the research ops tasks and time. And then transcriptions, just kind of obvious, but once you get into translated transcriptions, then you are into, for instance, loading them up for auto transcriptions, you'll get into single voice, right? So you don't have two speakers, you have single speaker because it's just the translator speaking. So it just means there's a little bit of extra work if you're having to work from the English audio version and the English transcriptions. But there's definitely workarounds for that. Great, next slide. So now I'm just going to move into next slide into just a few more things around kind of more research operations. Yeah, other things for us, time zones, holidays, as much as we work quite hard to keep ourselves very aware and try to book them in, always seems to kind of catch you out weirdly, sort of in various ways, or just little things. So yeah, that's a constant one to keep on top of. But, especially with remote work in particular, you'll have, we have far more people observing and engaging from all over, just like this call right now, from around the world. So you're then kind of really looking to align time zones in the right way for kind of live engagement in terms of observation, as an example, with research. And holidays, sorry, just clicking advancing here. So holidays, mainly it's to do with there's just so many out there. And for some countries, there are a lot, China places, and it's all about which ones are observed, which ones are not observed, and which ones are going to make a difference. So they can be quite challenging, but that's kind of a never-ending thing. But again, there's some great tools out there, particular website-based ones that are really handy, and other ways to kind of embed that into your platforms and systems. Yeah, and then moving on, I've already touched a bit on that, but kind of moving into remote world, as I would call it, like Zoom. Again, that's become very ubiquitous. Prior to this, when we were doing mostly primarily face-to-face with some remote, and then right at the start of pandemic change, we were using Zoom, but not really so much for research. We would be using things like Look Back, which is much more specialized on design and maybe a bit more evaluative. But it just transitioned quite rapidly. The tools got better, and Zoom became better and very ubiquitous. And we found that in the end, that's pretty much where we kind of land, is with Zoom, even for our research and kind of everything we're doing. But it's not always the case everywhere. So still, it's interesting that Zoom doesn't is often not workable if you're in mainland China, for instance, and we do quite a few projects there. So we'll often need to fall back on some alternatives. One of those is like Vuv. There's some others, you know, which don't present them a problem when you're having to coordinate everything from kind of who needs to access and where people are, and recordings and such. Yeah, and then kind of just moving on to tools, you know, again, Zoom, just another reason why that solution is great is you go straight to the cloud, a bit like this we're doing right now, which is just quite amazing. And then as you saw with Condense, we do use Condense, you know, transcription. It's not everything, you know, you always have to be careful that it isn't just about what people say, but of course with the new capabilities of auto transcription, that's very powerful. It just was never available years ago. You'd have to pay and wait the time to have it kind of human transcribed. So it is great. I mean, it's an incredible tool. And what took us to Condense, to be honest, was all of our international work. It was just a much better system, much better quality and capability with more than just English, with multiple languages, you know, kind of a core set that are very solid, and then even additional ones that you can kind of still make them very usable. But yeah, that kind of recordings really kind of then drive the ability to get transcripts, which then kind of can, especially for more discovery where there is a lot being discussed and difficult to keep track of. So that's really important as a kind of engine, if you like, around how you're going to analyze and start to get into tagging and clustering and other ways of synthesizing and sense making out of that. So, but of course, there's, you know, lots of other ones as well that we use and touch upon, maybe Miro, occasionally Airtable. Sometimes it depends on our clients and what have you. But again, all very powerful these days, you know, being web-based, cloud-based, fantastic. Yeah, and also just finally on transcriptions, you know, again, you kind of get it even within Zoom to some degree, but in particular with Condense, we found, you know, you can do, I'm not trying to sell Condense, but you can, getting clips, clips is just so fast and easy, you know, again, it's cross-referencing with transcriptions. Next slide, please. And then finally, just touching real quickly on participants recruitment, as we kind of find internationally. So we partner, we do a lot of work where we're working with our clients and they have access to their existing customers, or it may be internal staff as an example. And so then we'll be kind of organizing recruitment in a more organic way, you know, kind of more scheduling based, screening and scheduling, but kind of for us, whereas that really the majority, we're still going out doing more essentially cold recruit, say consumer based or other profiles that are going to be external. So we've often found through many years, you know, partnering with essentially what we call, you know, market research agencies, essentially field agencies, where a big part of what they do is kind of sourcing the capability to find people and participants that in a very effective way. But, you know, what we, again, with international, you just find, wow, you have to find out who and how they work. They have very different working processes in terms of communication can be really important. And some are, everybody's like anywhere else, some are better than others. And aspects about responsibilities for the attendee, for participants. In some countries like the US, you'll get, well, you know, you're just going to have to pay for more spares because if they don't show up, then that's kind of the model more there in many ways. And therefore, you know, we'll do what we can, but it's really, that's why you need more spares. Whereas in other places, they really are like, no, you know, we're kind of guaranteeing that they're all going to be there. And if they don't, we'll find you a replacement. And even in other countries we found recently, whether that's country specific or not, say in Saudi Arabia and others, you know, in Japan, they'll actually join the call, like on Zoom, even just checking in to make sure that their participant has shown up and be just so proactive, being ready to kind of go and chase them up or find an alternative. So again, it's just really interesting across the different areas. Things like data handling as well, which I'll just touch on at the end here. Pricing, we have found you can get some really dramatic pricing even for the same profiles, especially when you're out of the consumer areas and into slightly more specialized profiles. As an example, like the luxury related project Anne was alluding to, yeah, you can just get some very high fees in some countries, you know, in terms of the same profiles that you might have in, say, the UK in comparison, or even Germany, say Japan and elsewhere. And then, yeah, and these profiles, Anne pretty much covered it already, but they can really vary by country. There can be these other unique factors, such as income levels. In other words, what's assumed at the kind of main market area for the client or the business can be quite insular and kind of focused on that market. Maybe that can often be North America as an example. And the things don't always translate in terms of income levels and even like, what things cost and sort of the buying power and access to goods, like Anne said. And that all those things wrapped together can really make some quite significant differences in really the kind of profiles that you then need to kind of think about that are equivalent to the main one. So they're just other findings we find to keep in mind when you're going out much more widely internationally. And then finally, a little final one there, which kind of we found, and it's really important, is like GDPR. So if we kind of talk in a more European kind of centric model, if you like, because that's where we are essentially. So if you are, as an example, if you are a data controller, as it's called, or processor established in the EU or the UK, which you're handling personal data, which you will be pretty much in all the work that we do. Well, even if you're doing, say, remote, let's say you're doing work with somebody in participants in India or China or somewhere, it doesn't matter actually through GDPR, like all of that personal data still applies. And I'm not going to begin to talk in any detail about GDPR, but it's just one of these things of keeping in mind, that's another learning, especially when you start doing much more global reach, that interestingly, it doesn't just mean the rules stay quite insular within the certain locations. And the recruiters are very good about that, but sometimes they don't always know. Sometimes it's on our own responsibility more than if we're partnering with say a field agency in India as an example. And of course, a lot of that also is just good practice, because that aligns with good research guidelines and code of ethics, et cetera. It's very much kind of the same thing, which we always want to follow, no matter where you're doing the research. And with that, next slide, that brings us to kind of conclusion for our section. Yeah, and thank you very much. Any questions? I'll turn it over to Sina.